Who is it? I'm back, guys. So some of you may be wondering what I've been doing for the past few weeks without, well, aside from being an Islamophobe.
Yes, Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." But it's just morality that demands we protect the most vulnerable. So let me ask you, when do you think life begins?
Eric, are you all right in there?
Yeah, I'm fine, Mom. I'm just in here master debating.
Wait, before you get mad at me, I can explain. No, I cannot explain. I just was lazy and could not make anything new, but I'm back again with another video, so let's jump into it. So yes, the Jehovah's Witnesses, aka the JWs, aka the J-Dubs, not that J-Dub. Who are they? What's up with these guys that be moving around with cards, with these fancy books with pretty nice pictures of Jesus? Yep, we're answering that question today, so stick around. In 1844, a Baptist preacher named William Miller prophesied that the world would come to an end in October of that very year. But as you have probably noticed, we are in 2025, so anyway, this led to what is known as the Great Depression, and this was just a time where people lost faith in, the church and Christianity, basically because of William Miller's false prophecy that did come to pass. Like all false prophecies, I don't even know why I had to clarify that, but let's go on. After William Miller's prophecy not coming to pass, he basically stayed away from prophesying about the end times and when they were to come. But from his congregation came two particular people. One of them was Charles Taze Russell, and the other was Ellen G. White. We shall not be talking about Ellen G. White today, but we shall be talking about Charles Taze Russell because he is the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Charles Taze Russell was a religious enthusiast. However, he wasn't very fond of particular doctrines like the doctrine of hell. So, in opposition to some of this doctrine that in his own view was false, he started his own Bible study that he named the Millennial Dawn Bible Study. It was from that Bible study that the Jehovah's Witnesses, as we know them today, came. Charles Taze Russell started writing a journal through which he articulated his theological views. This was called the Watchtower Journal. And yes, it is the ancestor of the Watchtower magazine that we have today. Today, the Jehovah's Witnesses are led by the Watchtower organization. And the Watchtower organization in turn is led by the president of the Watchtower organization. The president is seen as the prophet, and the organization is seen as what normal Christians would refer to as the church. So it is God's instrument on earth, and the prophet is God's messenger to the organization. As the saying goes, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Well, it was only a matter of time until God's instrument on the earth, the Watchtower organization, had its own false apocalyptic prophecies. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a little sprinkling of Christ will return in 1914, which they now say was an invisible return. But hey, what do we know? Another sprinkling of the world will end in 1925, and then say, oh, we got it off by 50 years. It will end in 1975.
Are you sure?
Don't know if I'm not a maths guy.
You're not a maths guy. What guy are you?
Don't even know this.
That's a deeper one.
It is 2025. And by the way, these are all script teachings by the organization. So, well done to you, God's instrument on the earth. Another thing you may not know about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they don't do blood transfusions. So yes, if one of their family members is in need of blood, the pious thing to do is just to basically wait out and die. Yeah. Pretty nice stuff. For this particular doctrine, they would quote verses in the Bible that speak about not drinking blood. So, yeah. Drinking blood transfusion, I guess they're like this, yeah. Yet another thing you may not know about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they do not take part in nationalistic practices. Now, this will range from singing the national anthem, saluting the flag, enrolling in the army. They do not take part in such acts. For the army, I think that would be because their worldview does not entirely have a concept of justified taking of life. So that's what traditional Christians would consider happens, in the army. Like soldiers have a pledge to protect their countrymen. And so when they kill in the act of war, it is sort of justified. So that would be the traditional Christian view. Though Jehovah's Witnesses would not hold this view, and so killing while you're a soldier is still counting as murder. Lastly, not everything about the Jehovah's Witnesses is a red flag. They're very good at love bombing, which is a very good thing if you ask me. We need more kind and sweet people in the world, right? Yes, we do need more kind and sweet people in the world. So if I were giving out a Nobel Prize, I'd probably give it to the Jehovah's Witnesses for, love bombing. They're also very passionate about teaching and studying the Bible. I mean, they came straight out of a Bible study. Like, what do you expect? In fact, they love the Word of God so much, they had to write their own Bible version. The New World Translation. I mean, you can't beat that, man. You just can't. That is true devotion right there. Do you have your own Bible? In this part of the video, as I discuss some of the Jehovah's Witness doctrine, I will also be offering some good answers, some answers that I find very intuitive and, pretty good in case you come across one of them. First, if you have encountered a Jehovah's Witness in any shape or form, then you probably have realized that they make a very big deal out of using the real name of God, which is Jehovah. And so they would make some argument along the line of, we use the real name of God and therefore we are the real worshippers of God. Which, I don't know if that's a good argument, but you decide. I mean, in the Bible you have God called all sorts of names, like Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Rapha, El Shaddai, but what do I know? I'm just a dumb guy on the internet. Another way you could take this is making the argument that since Jews revere the name more than, Jehovah's Witnesses or any other Christian group, does that make them the true followers of Jehovah? Because, I mean, Jews can't even say the word. That's how much they respect the name. So they won't even say it. They would use terms like Hashem, which means the name, or Adonai, the Lord. But they won't say the name because they fear the name. They respect it that much. So should we then say that they are the real followers of Jehovah because they respect his name? So whichever way the Jehovah's Witness may try to take it, it doesn't seem to be a good argument, if you ask me. A pretty intuitive response I usually give to this argument is, okay, so we have people in the Bible that use different names for God, and they still refer to God. Is God somehow disrespected by us not using his name? Like, is that a problem for him? If so, why did he not, make it clear to everybody else that was giving him a name? When people are calling him the God who sees them, the God who heals them, or the Lord their protector, why does he not, rebuke them and say, hey, my name is Jehovah? Which is not even a Hebrew word, if you think about it, because that word comes from the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, which is read as Yod He Vav He. That's a word that is not pronounced in Hebrew. It is just sort of transliterated into what we have today, right? All the way to Latin. Then from Latin, we have it in English, which is Jehovah now. So even if we were to go by that logic, he did not say his name is Jehovah. So yeah, we have many problems, basically. Second, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jesus Christ is not God. They will teach that he is the Son of God, but he is not the Most High God. So they make a distinction between God the Father as being the real God, the one true God, as they would say, and Jesus Christ being sort of a God. Now, I know you may be thinking, but John 1:1 does say he is God, the Word was God. Well, joke's on you, because in the New World Translation it says that the Word was a God. Yeah, you heard it right. The Word was a God. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the Jehovah's Witnesses have their own translation of the Bible. Now, you may be tempted to think that this is just another translation or another version, but no, it is a translation just to fit their theology. So, you may think that, the verse would naturally say the same thing in their Bible, but very many times it does not. A very good example of this is John 1:1. Let us take a look at what the Greek actually says. So this is the Greek, and it basically says, in beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, or with the God, and God was the Word. Or you can say, and the Word was God, as is written popularly in most translations. So just to explain a bit of grammar here, you can see that theon is different from theos, even though they're referring to the same word, God, right? So theon here is in the accusative case. So in grammar, usually in some languages, you differentiate between the subject of the sentence and the object of the sentence. Now here, logos is the subject and theon is the object. So to sort of clarify on that, rather than keep both of them in their neutral states, or of like normal nouns, what we do is we modify the noun to the accusative case. So you would say now ton theon, and this basically is telling us that the word here is with the God, and the God here would be basically the Father. So then we get to this word which it says, and God was the Word. So you notice that this theos here has no ho, as you can see for the logos. The ho, or the o, as it would be pronounced, is supposed to be the definite article. Now, theos here does not have it. So what the Jehovah's Witness would say is that there is no article before the word God, and so they would sort of fix an indefinite article here. So it's not the definite article. So what they would do is they would fix the indefinite article here of a, so that it reads, and a God was the Word, or and the Word was a God, of which that does not exist in the text. So it's sort of adding to the text. The right way to interpret it is, and God was the Word. That is what it says. Or you can switch the word and God and still say, and the Word was God. So that is the consistent way to say it. This theos here is defining what the logos is. The logos is God. It is not saying that he is the same God that is being talked about here, because this is ton theon. It's a definite God, but it's not referring to this God. It's talking to a person, a different sort of like person who is also the theos, who is also God. So what you encounter here is that the logos is different from the God, the Father. So that's why you're saying that the logos is with the Father or the God, and the logos, which is the word, is also God. In other words, it is a different person of God. That is the Greek. It is very clear here that the New World Translation twists the verse to fit its own theology in this instance, and therefore cannot be trusted. The Jehovah's Witness may also point to other verses, such as those that say that Jesus is the firstborn of all creation. And what they would argue in this situation would be that usually you are a firstborn of the category for which you are, being declared firstborn of. So if you're saying firstborn of all creation, then it means that he is the firstborn of all creatures, all created things. Just as you would say firstborn of all your father's children, so it means when it comes to your father's children, you are the firstborn. There is a problem here, because clearly the word firstborn is not being used in that sense. The Bible also does call David the firstborn of all kings. Does that mean that David was the first king of Israel? Definitely not. What it does mean here is that he is preeminent. This is a very clear theme when you're reading the book of Colossians. It does portray Christ as being supreme over all things, and thus the firstborn from the dead. He is preeminent, he is supreme. That is what it is trying to say there. Another way you could argue this, the Jehovah's Witness, is by pointing out that John chapter 1 does not agree with their understanding of firstborn of all creation. Why? Because if Jesus even if we were to go with their translation, right? If Jesus was a God, the Bible says that, I think it's in like verse 3, John 1, I think verse 3 around there, it says that all things were made through him. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So if you could actually illustrate this as sort of as a Venn diagram, you can draw a set of all things that are created, all things that were made, and then you have Jesus on the other side making all the things that were made. So either Jesus is part of that circle of all things that were made, or he's not. Because if he's a part of all things that were made, then that means that he made himself. So how can he make himself if he does not exist, right? So there is a logical contradiction there. You cannot understand firstborn of all creation in the sense of him being the first creature. You have to understand it as him being preeminent, because if you look throughout that book or throughout the full chapter, there's clearly an articulation of supremacy. That there's no such thing as him being the first of all creatures. Third, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus Christ was crucified on a stake and not a cross. What is the difference? So they would say that Jesus Christ was crucified on something like a pole. So his hands would sort of be stretched out above his head, and you would have like one nail through both of his arms, another through both of his feet. Now, to be fair, the word translated cross in the Greek is stauros, and this word means stake. So it would be a good reading for you to say that Jesus was crucified on a stake. The only problem you have is that there is no word for cross in Greek, and so crosses were referred to as stauros in biblical writing. How do we know this? There is a piece of graffiti from the 2nd century named the Alexamenos Graffitos. This piece of graffiti shows a man worshipping a crucified individual, and this individual is sort of having a donkey head. Now this is sort of a mockery to a person named Alexamenos, and we know this because there are writings next to these drawings that basically read, Alexamenos worships his god. So this is a mockery of Christian beliefs, because they worship a crucified guy and he's basically represented as one with a donkey head. It's sort of like a joke. Whoever is writing this is making fun of Alexamenos. One thing to notice though is that this crucified individual is on a T-shaped cross. This is early 2nd century that we're looking at, right? So these are people that are basically in the early church. And this is very clear. There has been an acceptance for a T-shaped cross in Christian history. In fact, there is no reason for you to say that it was otherwise, because there's nothing that points in a direction of a stake. Every piece of evidence you have is that when Christians say stauros, they're saying the cross, and they're meaning the cross in its T shape. Now, a pretty interesting nuance here is that crosses were actually multi-shaped. You could have X-shaped crosses, you would have capital T crosses, you would have small T-shaped crosses like the ones that we have in our churches today. You would also have good old trees. Then you also have stakes, like what, the Jehovah's Witnesses think Christ was crucified on. The only problem is that the early Christians clearly speak of something and illustrate something that is T-shaped. So it's basically just cherry picking meanings of a word, and that is why this is not a very good view to have, in my opinion. Fourth, the Jehovah's Witnesses would say that Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead physically. There's some obvious problems with this, because you can always point out the fact that he asks Thomas to touch his hands and feet. He does eat fish, and he tells them that a ghost cannot eat fish. So, it's just insane. But what they would point to would be the verse in, I think, Peter. I think it's 2nd Peter or 1st Peter. I'm not quite sure, but it's a verse in Peter that talks about him raising, Christ being raised in spirit, and it's talking about baptism. I think it's 1st Peter chapter 3. I will put the reference at the end of the video, so don't worry about that. So yes, in Peter it does say that Christ rose in the Spirit. However, it's also important for us to realize that Peter here is making a theological point, and he's using the resurrection of Christ to make a theological point about baptism and how it saves us, it being a spiritual transformation, a spiritual regeneration, if I'm to say so. And Peter uses the language of Christ raising in spirit and not in body because he's making a theological point. However, something to also notice here is that it does not say anything about his bodily resurrection. Like, it's entirely silent, right? So it would be a leap for you to infer that since he rises in spirit, therefore he doesn't rise in the body. It does not follow because it says nothing about him raising in the body. Like, it does not even mention his body at all. So it's sort of like a leap in logic for you to say that he's risen in spirit but not in body. Yet you have the first eyewitness accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, bringing out a physically risen Christ. You have him meeting some of his followers at Emmaus. You have him eating food to show that he's not a ghost. So things like these have to be taken into account. And the conclusion should naturally be that Christ did indeed rise physically, not that he just rose spiritually. Fifth, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe in hell as most Christians would think of it. Most Christians would think that hell is a lake of fire in which people burn forever and ever. It is called in the scriptures the lake of fire, the lake of sulfur, and all of these things. But to be fair, not every Christian denomination actually thinks of hell in this particular way. There's those that think that it is just a cease to existence, sort of like a second death, as it is called. And the point that would be brought out here would be that since death is thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death, and death is not a material thing, it is just a state, you can't really burn a state. So how can you then say that it is a real fire? Which is a fair argument. Now, I do have some problems with this argument, and that's what I will try to point out here. So I will argue for why I think hell is in fact fire and a lake of sulfur, as the Bible speaks of it sometimes. But as I said, there is nuance here, so you can hold a different view. As I mentioned earlier, the argument here goes as follows. Since death is a state, sin is a state, you cannot sort of destroy a state in the same way that you would destroy like a material thing, so you can't burn it. Therefore, there must be some sort of cease of existence, right? So that would be the natural flow of the argument. Now, I do think that intangible things can actually be destroyed by fire. And to point this out, I would refer to Isaiah chapter, 6, where Isaiah has, this coal touch his lips. So an angel holds a coal from the altar of the Lord, but he uses a pair of tongues. Now, the angel is an immaterial being, he's a spiritual being, but he has to use a pair of tongues. And yet, when this particular coal touches Isaiah's mouth, it does not burn him. It does cleanse him, though, because I think he says that, his lips have been cleansed, something like that. So, taking that into accountability, I believe that there is such a fire that can actually destroy immaterial things. That is not something that God cannot do. So, it is very, very much in line with biblical understanding for you to say that the second death is in fact the lake of fire and sulfur, as the book of Revelation puts it. So that would be an argument you could run on that. But as I said, there's some nuances to this view. Not everyone holds the same view of hell, even in the Christian church. So that would be a more nuanced topic to discuss. But I believe that is a very good argument to make for the lake of fire and sulfur. Lastly, Holy Communion. Now, the topic of Holy Communion is a little bit even more nuanced for the Jehovah's Witnesses, because for them, Holy Communion is not something that every believer should actually take. They think that Holy Communion is a meal that only the 144,000 who will go to heaven, according to their theology, only 144,000 people will go to heaven. That's the way they understand Revelation. And all the others shall sort of remain on the earth and chill on the new earth with lions and, You've seen the books, guys. So yes, only the 144,000 are supposed to partake of the Holy Communion. Now, this causes some pretty interesting things. In the Jehovah's Witness kingdom halls around the world, during Easter, so Jehovah's Witnesses do not actually celebrate holidays. So they will not celebrate Easter, they will not celebrate Christmas and most Christian holidays because they would obviously say they're pagan, have pagan roots, they're not pagans. Why are we talking about pagans? But yes, they do not have traditional Christian holidays. What they do have during Easter time is what they call the memorial service. And so in this memorial service, the meal is sort of passed around. Now, since drinking wine is a sin, according to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they do not use wine when celebrating the memorial meal. So it would look something like what you would find in a traditional like evangelical church or Pentecostal church, just juice and bread or something along those lines. So that's what they would have for their memorial meal. Interestingly though, no one really does take the memorial meal. So they would pass it around the congregation. Like, you get it, you pass it on. You get it, you pass it on. Only the 144,000 are supposed to eat that meal, as I mentioned earlier. Here's the interesting part though. At almost every kingdom hall, there's a group of people, maybe one or two that you would consider, very pious witnesses. They do all the right stuff, they live their lives right with God, and once in a while they may eat the meal. You would have like about two, let's just say there've only been two people that have had the memorial meal at that particular, kingdom hall. And then you have about thousands. Let's just even say that maybe there are 1,000 kingdom halls in the world. So easily you're about at 2,000 people, right? Now this is a community that has existed for over 100 years. Are you trying to tell me they have never reached 144,000 people? Right? Taking into consideration, the very first congregants thought they were actually going to be the 144,000 people that would be taken to heaven when Christ was to return in 1914, right? So he would take the 144,000. Now, as we very well know, Christ did not return because he says that just as you can see the lightning across the sky, you will see the Son of Man return. Now, they do say that it is an invisible return, but what do we know, as I said? But yes, very interesting thing to think about. So there are a group of people that are so proud to think that they would be a part of the 144,000 witnesses. Tough stuff, guys, tough stuff. But very interesting nonetheless. Right, that's pretty much what I had for you guys today. I hope that this was very informative. If you have any interesting responses that you came up with concerning the topics that I have discussed in this video, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll be sure to engage with them. And of course, till next time, remember,
the crux of the matter is this, and one only: Christianity is based. Oh, hey, he said Christianity is based!